The day began like any other alarm at 6. Coffee brewed on autopilot, and a quick glance at my budget app before heading to the office. My one-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. The rent took a heavy bite out of my paycheck, and the rest was divided between bills, groceries, and the small emergency fund I was forever trying to grow. I had long ago learned to stretch every dollar until it thinned to paper by the time I clocked out. My birthday had become just another long Tuesday. Still, I stopped at the gas station on the corner, as I did every Friday, to buy my weekly lottery ticket. $10 was my usual splurge, my small, harmless rebellion against the relentless practicality of my life. This time, though, I slid a 20 across the counter. Birthday treat, I told the clerk, half joking, half hoping. He smiled, printed the tickets, and wished me luck. That evening, I celebrated alone with leftover Thai takeout and a glass of boxed wine. The TV murmured in the background while I scrolled through social media, skimming photos of friends in nicer clothes, at fancier dinners, living lives that always seemed just out of reach. Around 9, I remembered the tickets, tossed casually on the kitchen counter. I pulled them toward me and opened the lottery website on my phone. The first number matched, then the second. My breath caught at the third. By the time I matched all 6, my hands were trembling so badly I had to set the phone down. $1.4 million. After taxes. Still more than I could have earned in a decade. I stared at the screen, waiting for the rush of joy I thought would come. It didn't. Instead, a chill settled in my chest. I'd read too many stories of lottery winners whose lives imploded under the weight of other people's expectations. My family had a long memory for money, especially when it wasn't theirs. I knew exactly how quickly the news would spread, how suddenly every conversation would circle back to what I could do for them. I closed the browser, folded the ticket carefully, and tucked it deep into my desk drawer. I wouldn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my siblings, not even my closest friend. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. The money was mine, but the real challenge would be keeping it that way. And to do that, I needed to remember exactly who I was dealing with. I didn't have to think hard to remember why I couldn't share the news. My family had been writing their history on the backs of my check stubs for years, and my name was always the one in the from column when my mother, Vivian, called 3 years ago about the roof leaking over her sunroom. She asked for just a little temporary help. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as Harold, her husband, closed a property sale. I wired her $3,000 that same day. The next month, instead of repayment, I got photos of them smiling on a weekend trip to Napa. The subject of the roof money never came up again. Dorian, my older brother, was worse. His requests always came wrapped in drama, urgent bills, car trouble, medical scares. I'd send what I could, sometimes draining my savings, only to see him post pictures on social media from beaches and music festivals. When I confronted him once, he laughed it off, saying I worried too much. Rhea, my younger sister, made her play during wedding season. She swore she'd pay back the $2,000 I put on my credit card for her florist and caterer as soon as the thank you cards go out. 5 years later. The debt remained, along with a string of excuses about kids, mortgages, and unexpected expenses. In that landscape of IOUs that never returned, Aunt Lenore stood out like a clear patch of sky. She lived in a tiny bungalow, drove a car older than I was, and worked extra hours at the school just to cover rising costs. Yet she'd slip me a 20 when she heard my car needed an oil change, or bake casseroles to fill my freezer when I was swamped at work. Her help was never much in dollars, but it was always real, always offered without strings. As I stared at the winning ticket tucked into my desk, those memories lined up in sharp relief. I knew who I could trust, and who would see me as nothing more than a sudden solution to their problems. That meant my next move had to be careful. 2 days after the win, I drove to Portland to meet with a financial advisor whose name I found through a referral chain that ended in a former client who valued privacy above all else. His office sat high in a downtown tower, the kind of place where every surface gleamed and every voice was measured. Philip Garrison greeted me with a handshake that was warm without being invasive. Once the door closed behind us, I slid the ticket across his desk. His eyes flicked over the numbers, a brief lift of his brow betraying his surprise, before his face returned to a calm, professional mask. We spent 2 hours in quiet, methodical discussion. He explained the structure of a revocable trust that could claim the winnings on my behalf, ensuring my name never appeared in public records. We mapped out a strategy that spread the funds into multiple investment accounts low risk, steady growth, and set aside a smaller, liquid account I could access for day-to-day needs without drawing attention. When I asked about common mistakes lottery winners made, he didn't hesitate. The fastest way to lose your peace, he said, is to tell the wrong person. Once you do, you can't take it back. People will treat you differently, even if they think they're not. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my stomach. Keeping quiet wasn't just about protecting the money. It was about protecting myself from the slow erosion of trust that would follow. By the time I left, I had a folder of documents, a detailed action plan, and a list of next steps. The ticket was no longer a flimsy scrap of paper. It was a verified claim tucked into the machinery of legal protection. Driving home, I realized nothing in my outer life could change, not yet. I would still clock in at the office every morning, still shop the grocery sales, still drive my dented Corolla. The win was real. But until I knew exactly who I was dealing with, it had to stay invisible. And that meant finding a way to see my family clearly, without the money distorting the view. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't just want to keep my secret, I wanted proof. Proof of who would stand with me when there was nothing to gain. That's how the idea formed. Quiet at first, then insistent I would create a crisis and see who answered the call. $5,000. Enough to sting. Enough to matter. But not an impossible ask for the people in my family who claimed to care. The story would be simple. My company had shut down unexpectedly after losing its biggest client. My severance wouldn't come through for weeks, and recent medical bills had wiped out my savings. I needed help with rent and utilities until I found a new job. As soon as I thought it through, the doubt crept in. Was this manipulative? Was I setting them up to fail? I told myself it wasn't about trapping anyone. It was about protecting myself. If they couldn't be counted on when I was supposedly broke, why would I trust them if they knew I was a millionaire? I started drafting the details like a script. I researched recent corporate closures to make my story plausible. I practiced sounding weary but not desperate, making sure to leave just enough space for them to choose without feeling pressured. My goal wasn't to guilt them, it was to see their natural reaction. Then I opened a notebook and wrote down each name: my mother Vivian, my stepfather Harold, my father Martin, my stepmother Candace, my brother Dorian, my sister Rhea, my cousin Brett, and Aunt Lenore. Beside each, I jotted predictions. Vivian might offer a small amount but suggest asking someone else. Harold, no. Martin, lecture, no money. Candace, no. With judgment. Dorian, disappear. Rhea, sympathy. No cash. Brett, promise to help. Then vanish. Lenore, she'd give what she could, even if it was less than I asked. Looking at the list, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This was my family, reduced to a column of expected refusals. I closed the notebook, my jaw set. If I was going to face the truth, I needed to face it completely, and that meant starting the calls the very next day. I decided to start with my mother. Vivian had always claimed she would do anything for her children, but I'd learned over the years that anything usually meant advice or concern, not sacrifice. Still, she was my mother, and a part of me wanted to believe she might surprise me. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. I eased into my story, describing the company's sudden closure, the severance delay, and the medical bills. She gasped in the right places, her tone softening with each detail. But when I told her I needed $5,000, her voice shifted. "Oh, honey, I wish I could, but Harold and I just put the down payment on the lake house. Things are tight right now. Have you tried asking your father, or maybe Rhea Paul's doing so well in tech these days?" The gentle deflection stung more than an outright no. I thanked her anyway, told her I'd figure something out, and hung up. My father was next. Martin's greeting was brisk, almost suspicious, as if he sensed I wanted something. I gave him the same story, though his face, at least in my mind, remained unchanged. When I asked for help, he leaned into the familiar role of lecturer. "Ilara, this is exactly why I've told you to keep 6 months of expenses saved." What happened to that plan I explained about the medical bills and the rent? But it didn't matter. I'd love to help. But Candace and I are focusing on our retirement. You need to see this as a learning opportunity. His words carried the finality of a closed door. By the time I called my sister, I'd braced myself for more of the same. Rhea was warm from the start, her voice rising in sympathy when I told her the news. "That's awful. Ilara, I can't believe they just closed like that." For a moment, I let myself believe she might say yes, but then came the pivot. "We just bought the new SUV last month, and the kids' tuition is due. Plus, we're remodeling the master bath. Paul handles the finances, and he's really strict about the budget. But listen, why don't you come stay with us for a bit? We can clear out the guest room. You could save on rent until you find something new." It was an offer, but not the one I'd asked for. Moving into her world, even temporarily, would mean giving up control and becoming a living reminder of her generosity. I thanked her, saying I needed to stay in the city for interviews. 3 conversations in, my predictions were holding, and with each call, the gap between what I hoped for and what I received was widening fast. I didn't expect much from Dorian, but I still gave him the same chance I'd given everyone else. I texted first, explaining briefly that I needed to talk. No reply. I called that evening straight to voicemail. The next day, I tried again, then sent a follow-up message. "I really need to speak with you. It's important." Silence. By the end of the week, I stopped trying. He'd made his choice. Candace, my stepmother, didn't bother with small talk when I called. I told her about the job loss, the medical bills, the rent. She cut me off halfway through. "Ilara, I'm sorry, but the answer's no. You should think about downsizing your apartment or finding a roommate. It's not wise to live beyond your means." I almost reminded her that I wasn't the one leasing luxury cars or posting vacation photos every other month. But I bit my tongue. The conversation was over before it began. Harold, my stepfather, was even more blunt. "You're not my responsibility," he said as soon as I explained what I needed. "I've supported your mother for years, but your financial problems are your own. Maybe you should have chosen a career that paid better." There was nothing more to say after that. Brett, my cousin, surprised me at first when I called. He was immediately sympathetic, offering to meet for lunch and give me a check. "You've always been good to me. Ilara, I'll take care of you," he said. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope, but the morning we were supposed to meet, he texted an hour before something came up. "Let's reschedule." We never did. My calls after that went unanswered. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. The ones who'd needed me in the past had no trouble disappearing when the roles reversed. And for those who didn't vanish outright, their refusals were wrapped in justifications that made them feel noble for keeping their wallets shut. By the time I crossed the last name off my list, the results were almost exactly as I'd predicted. Almost. There was still one person I hadn't called, not because I was saving her for last, but because part of me already knew how she'd respond. Aunt Lenore didn't need a script to prove who she was. 2 days after I'd crossed the last name off my list, my phone rang. The caller ID read Lenore. I hadn't reached out to her yet, but her voice came warm and direct. "Ilara, honey, I just heard from someone sounds like you've had some bad luck at work. Are you okay for a moment?" I almost dropped the act entirely, but I kept to my script, telling her about the job loss and the bills. She didn't ask for proof or press for details. Instead, she said, "Let's have lunch tomorrow." My treat. We met at a small diner she loved, a place with chipped mugs and pies in glass cases by the register, after we'd finished eating. She reached into her purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. "I want you to take this," she said, sliding it across the table. Inside was a neat stack of bills, $3,000. I stared at it, my throat tightening. "Lenore, I can't take this. It's too much." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "It's not the full amount you need. I know, but it'll help with rent. And if you need a place to stay. My sofa pulls out. It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Her words didn't feel like charity. They felt like safety. I thought about the others, about excuses and closed doors, and the contrast was almost too much to process. She had the least to spare, yet here she was, giving me nearly everything she had without hesitation. I slipped the envelope into my bag, promising to pay her back as soon as I could. The guilt burned, but so did the gratitude. This was the answer I'd been looking for. The proof that someone in my family's love wasn't measured against a balance sheet. As I drove home, the envelope sat heavy in my bag, a reminder that my test had revealed more than I was ready to face, and it was time to stop pretending with at least one person. The next evening, I asked Lenore to come by for tea. When she settled onto my couch, her hands wrapped around the warm mug, I knew I couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. "I need to tell you something," I began. "I didn't lose my job. The whole story I told you, it was a test. I wanted to see who in the family would help if I needed it, and you were the only one who did." I hesitated, then went further. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $1.4 million. You're the first person I've told. Lenore didn't look shocked so much as thoughtful. After a long sip of tea, she said, "I understand why you did it, but I'm sad you felt you had to." She set her cup down and leaned back. "Years ago, when my grandmother died, I inherited $35,000. Your uncle convinced me to invest in his friend's restaurant, said it was a sure thing. Within a year, the place folded, and every cent was gone. He told me it was our money, not just mine, and I had no right to be angry." She shook her head. "That's when I learned money doesn't just show who others are. It shows who you are." Her words landed with weight. I realized she was right, not just about them, but about me. This win could turn me into someone cautious and bitter, or someone deliberate and generous. I decided then that I'd make sure Lenore never had to worry about rent, bills, or medicine again, but in a way that would never make her feel like a charity case. Before the night ended, we were already talking about what I needed to do next, that Sunday. My apartment felt smaller than usual as every chair filled. My mother and Harold sat together on the couch, Martin and Candace by the window, Rhea with her arms folded, and even Dorian lingering near the kitchen. Brett leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone until I cleared my throat. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I wanted to clear up a few things. I'm fine. I've accepted a better paying position with great benefits, and I'll be transitioning next month." Relief flickered across a few faces, as if they'd come expecting me to ask for more money. "But," I continued, when I thought I was in trouble, "I reached out to you, and the responses I got told me a lot about where I stand in this family." Vivian glanced at Harold, then back at me. "We all have our own financial commitments. Ilara, it's not always possible to help." Martin's voice took on that familiar lecturing tone. "You can't expect others to solve your problems." "That's not how life works." Rhea shifted uncomfortably. "I offered you a place to stay. That counts for something." Dorian didn't look up from the floor. I was dealing with my own stuff. Their excuses washed over me, familiar as the pattern they'd repeated for years, but this time, I didn't let them slide. "I'm not here to argue. I just want to be clear, those days when I emptied my savings to bail someone out, they're over. I'm done being the family's safety net. The silence that followed was thick, but I didn't feel it. When the meeting broke up, most left without looking me in the eye. Only Lenore stayed behind, helping me stack coffee cups in the sink, her quiet presence a steady reminder of why I'd done this. A year later, my life looked different in all the ways that mattered. I lived in a modest, sunlit home with a small garden I tended every morning, just a short walk from Lenore's new, fully paid-for bungalow. She'd insisted on keeping it simple, but it had wide doorways for when her knees acted up and a kitchen she loved. I'd left my old job and poured my energy into the nonprofit I'd founded, an organization dedicated to helping isolated seniors with everything from companionship visits to small home repairs. We'd grown faster than I expected, with volunteers who shared the same quiet commitment Lenore had always shown me. My contact with the rest of the family stayed cordial, but shallow holiday calls, polite small talk when real emergencies arose. I sometimes stepped in anonymously, paying a hospital bill here, covering a rehab fee there. They never knew the source, and I preferred it that way. Looking back, I realized the money had been a gift, but it wasn't the real prize. What I'd gained was clarity, knowing who stood beside me without expectation, and the freedom to choose my circle without guilt. Peace, I learned, wasn't bought, it was built. That spring, Lenore and I sat on her porch, watching the light fade over the neighborhood we now shared. She reached over, gave my hand a small squeeze, and said, "We did good, kiddo." I smiled, knowing she was right and that the best things I'd earned couldn't be measured in dollars at all.